So to get started, I work with a lot of new developers that come into our company and starting out. I've helped train a lot of people who are just getting into programming. I've done a lot with just kind of getting that training, teaching. So I have a lot of experience with newer programmers. And one of the things that I come across very often is the ability for people to not write reusable code, and you know, the copy paste syndrome. And so a lot of what I like to try to emphasize in that is to think of things modularly and scalability, and so we talked a lot about that in the previous presentation, of being able to scale your code, grow what you're doing. And so with that, you know, I want to mostly emphasize with this talk that Mojolicous is a framework that I enjoy using, and it's one that I use a lot with the things that I like to do. But the core of this is writing reusable code and why we would want to do that, and what the benefits are of doing that. So what is reusable code? When we're talking about reusable code, what is that? Does anybody have an answer for that? Does anybody want to?
Clearly Control-C and Control-V.
Control-C, Control-V. So who has done that? Who has done Control-C, Control-V? So you know, that's the standard of if you've written a program, you've done that at some point. If you've done code, you've done this at some point. Why is that bad?
Well, when somebody fixes one place, you don't have every place fixed.
Right. So we'll get into some of those examples. So this is simplified, but this is actually a version. We actually have production code that has this in it. As you look this over, somebody is creating object 0, 1, 2, 3, creating them in a list, passing them into cache graphs, coming down here, looping over the types, then looping over the objects that they created up here, and processing those. Now that's not necessarily code duplication, other than this big jumbly mess. Now I simplified it. There was actually 15 objects that they had created, and they were popping these and looping over them down here. Obviously that's not very pretty to look at. Now functional, yeah, that's going to work. That's going to do what they need, but how much overhead is here? How much overhead? We don't know. I mean, obviously we'd need to look into what object is, but if object was moose, and we were loading moose every time, and then passing that along and going through, we're talking about overhead. We're talking about a lot of things that are happening on the back end that we just don't understand. So this is a very new mistake. The person who actually wrote this came from a Java background and was used to doing things in this manner and didn't quite understand Perl. So if we wanted to make that a little bit more simple and do something similar, what he probably really meant to do was instantiate the object, pass that in, and then when we're looping over, not loop over each one of the objects and create that same thing. We only needed the object one time. We didn't need the object 4 times for each of those. So let's only use it once. So I kind of asked this already, but why write reusable code? And you can look at this awesome comic strip.
I sense that this has been used before.
This presentation has been used before. So why would you want to write reusable code? We kind of answered that. There was an answer before. If you're making changes, who here has ever had somebody come up with an idea that has never changed? You're going to need to go and edit your code, aren't you? So you go and you find, or now you've passed it on to teammate A or B or C, and they now have new goals to come in and change the business logic of your first function. And if they come in and change the business logic of that first function, but they didn't know that you had that 3 other places. Now you have a bug. That bug is going to be because you have new business rules or business logic in the first place that code was, but it didn't get changed in all those places. So bugs. Creating technical debt. That now creates this huge technical debt because now you either have to maintain that in all the places that you've put that code, or you have the bugs, and so that takes overhead. You have to have somebody go through and change that. Now sometimes people think that it might be easier to go in and maintain and change that instead of going through and writing the initial module that's going to go and load that and take that all through. So here's kind of another simple example of something that we've all done. This is kind of dumbed down and just a simple example. So we want to update A, update B, and update C. So we've hard-coded the hash inside of self. And all we're going to do is we're going to just take the update and we wanted to times it by 10. But we all know that the person of this code is going to come and say, no, I didn't want that by 10, I wanted it by 20. So we come in and we update that in the 2 places, but we didn't update it in all 3. Now the reports are wrong. Now some business guy over here is getting wrong information and is going to come back to you and say, why am I getting wrong information? So to clean that up, you could write this function, which is now just an update function that you pass the key in, as well as instead of hard coding the key in each, you just do that. Then if you ever needed to change this, you change it once. Then you call this function and you're set. So that's very very important when you're planning your projects, when you're going through and you're starting to map out and architect how you want to do something. Because if you start to do it and you think, oh, I'll just copy this code, I'll copy and paste it, you're creating a longer term. You have to hire more people to maintain those things. You have, I'm sure all of us in this room have spent hours or days or weeks on a bug that was introduced by copying and pasting or reusing code with not reusing code and not creating modules in a way that's going to do that. So one of the things that I like to try to encourage is to do things in a more modular way, do things in a way that you can reuse that. If you're writing one piece of code, chances are you are going to be using that at another point in time. I write a lot of little helper modules. We've done this in the Perlmongers, where we've kind of created our Perl tool belt, and you create those functions that you can use often. There's many resources out there, and chances are if you're writing something that way, it's probably already been done before. Maybe not the business logic and maybe not the rules. And so you would need to go through and try to figure out how you can do that. And so at the start of your project, you want to think about these things. Oftentimes, and most of us who have been doing programming for a long time, and this one just came to me last week at the Google Fest that they had here at UVU. Sometimes when you're starting out, you have to have that plan in place. If you don't have that plan in place of where you want to get to, what your goal is, what your end result is, you can't just sit down and start coding. But some of us do that. We know we just need to get something done and we need to get something out quick, and so we don't have that plan in place. So proper planning will help us with reducing our bugs, making our tests easier to write, scalability, and all of those things. So there's many wonderful uses of doing this that allow that to come in. Another great use of writing code like this is then the next person coming along isn't going to come in and say, what is this crap? Why is this here? What am I having to deal with? How am I going to manage this? I can't do anything with this. And then they're going to rewrite it themselves. And they'll probably have a variation of something like this now that they've done, as opposed to just being able to edit something in this function. And so if you're working in a team, it's also great to have that collaboration of code where we have one central repository of these functions that are common and used throughout the code, and you can standardize on them and use those together. So there's many reasons why you would want to do this, and it's usually in your best interest to do that. Now sometimes time doesn't allow for that. We all know that. We've all been under the gun of you have to get this done now. But it's still in your best interest to try to make sure you're doing things this way, and that's what starts to separate programmers from beginning or student programmers into more intermediate and more advanced. So a wonderful presentation earlier on Mojolicous, and so this isn't going to be touching too much on it other than what it provides as far as being able to plug in and reuse code. And so we'll use that as kind of the resource as we continue talking here. So helpers in Mojolicous are ways inside of your single application of reusing your code and making it possible to with the helper method to write it one time and use that in your controllers and your actions and your templates, and use that throughout your application without having to duplicate the code. And there was an example in the presentation before where he was moving the same type of code throughout and trying to make it sequential, and it kind of jumbled together. And that's what happens when you start to do that. Now, what if you're copying a 100 or 200 line function and you're copying that all over the place? That's a lot harder than when you're, so these examples that we're showing are a lot simpler, but the concept there is the same whether you're doing it for something small or something large. So working with helpers, Mojolicous allows you to create helpers, which are little bits of reusable code that can be called from other portions of your application. This is just the example syntax of how you would declare a helper inside of a light application inside of Mojolicous. You just call helper, and then you identify what you want that function to be called, and then you pass it a subroutine of this is what I return. So anytime inside my application, I can identify I can call self and my helper, and this will return the string. This is my helper. So inside of a template, I can call that, and it would replace that string anywhere in my template, anywhere in my application that I needed that string, and it can get more complex than that. Simple. Now I've written something that I can use in multiple places as opposed to copying and pasting this string everywhere throughout my code, and make that more reusable. So here's an example, just some simple code really quick that I wrote for the sake of this presentation. So we have, so we're just using a Mojolicous Lite application, and we're using a task object. We wanted to have a new task and an old task, and so from this we'll post to it, and we'll get a we're going to pass in the ID, so we're just going to get our task ID. Then we want to take the task, new up the task with the new task ID. We're going to load the task, we're going to process the task, and then we're going to say this task has been processed. But now we can see we've already got some duplicated code here. We're already duplicating the whole thing, and now if we needed to keep doing this for other things, there's going to be other tasks we might need to process, but it's all the same idea. It's just that we have different post methods for maybe passing different information in. So with Mojolicous, to do the helper syntax, now we've just created a helper for processing the task, where we can just pass the task ID in, do the same thing. Now we've abstracted that code out and pulled it out. So now all we have to do is call this. We could have even pulled this in of the rendering of the text and had that returned as well. But maybe we wanted this to say process, the new task has been processed and the old task has been processed. You could still have passed that in and done other stuff. But now we've got a great idea of, we have this one function that's going to be able to be used throughout the whole rest of our application. We know that we're going to need to process that task in multiple areas. Why not write it once and reference it? One thing that and I'm not using Mojolicious as much with the non-blocking because I still use a lot of MySQL, and most of the stuff that's there is still blocking. But when you're interacting with the database, you have to insert, you have to delete, you have to edit, you have to do all those things. And so I got tired of always copying and pasting the same insert, edit, delete, and so I created these helper functions in my applications. And inside of this, what we will do is we'll pass in our arguments of what we want to insert. Then from that, we'll also pass in what table we want to be able to access, and then just default if we don't have that. Then we call this function hash2mysql. Well, where is that being defined? Well, that's another helper. So we come down into here. This helper of a hash2mysql will take a hash. It'll come in and you'll pass in your information, and it will go, and now we're calling fields. Well, what's fields? Fields is another helper. So we'll come over here to fields. Fields comes in, and we get a key of what that is. So we don't have inside of our session, we can keep this if we keep calling the same thing, so we don't have to keep regenerating and keep making a database hit. So the first time we come through, we're going to store this in the session if it's not available, and we'll do this block where we go and and again, we could have kept going. So this is another connection that's there, and using DBIX connector. But we'll just prepare the table. We'll execute it, we'll loop through, and we'll get all the fields. We'll return the fields back over here. So now we have the fields of what that table was that we passed in. We'll loop through each of the fields, and inside of those, we'll then build a structure that has the fields and the elements that we passed in and made sure that they're valid. And then we return that back up to the original insert. We join all those together, we create our insert string, and then we execute that. So that's a standard. So now I've made this pretty generic that I can do that with any table. I don't have to go in and create an insert string for every single table that I've created. Now I have a way to go through and insert in any table or in any application. These right now are helpers, and so they're only inside my one application. But if I wanted to pull these out and use them in other applications, we would be able to create, Mojolicious makes an easy way of creating a plugin that you can then extract and use in multiple applications. You don't have to just use it in your single application.
So if you pass it a hash with fields that don't exist, it's taking one of those?
Yes. Yeah, and so in this implementation, yeah, if you passed in values that were not in that table, it's going to go and look and only try to. Yep.
That's what it does in the commercial.
Yep. So that's a great example of that. All of us have probably worked with databases or data in some point, or even APIs, where you have. You know, if you had a generic way of doing it, then you don't have to write that code over and over again. How many of us have gone through and you know, created variables for those different things and done something like this where you still do the interpolation and pass that through, but you still had to copy and paste that a whole bunch of times. So this is just making that simple function a little bit more generic and a little bit more usable throughout. So, like I was saying, there's the ability now to create a plugin in Mojolicious, and again, a lot of this, just like in the presentation that we saw before, this is very simple. It's not hard. It's sometimes that new concept of non-blocking or creating modules or creating and reusing that. It's once you start doing it, you're like, oh yeah, I've always known that. I've always known how to do that. That's just how I've always known it. But sometimes when you're not used to it, it is a new concept. It is different. So another way to use helpers is to install them as a plugin. And inside of Mojolicious, they have a way to go through and do that, and we'll show you here in a second. And you just register that helper, and then you can distribute that through different methods to be able to use that in multiple applications. So the 4 steps there are listed up there. You just create the package, and so you just write your module as a package, and then you just have to make sure that you use that in your application. Inside of your package, you have to register that with Mojolicous, and it will just know kind of how to do that. And then you call the plugin from your controller, your application, or your template. And it sounds simple, and that it really is. So let's go back, or here's just, we're going back to that first example of the task, and we're now registering it as a plugin. So you just identify it as a package, just like you would any other standard Perl package. We're going to just use base Mojolicous plugin to inherit any of the functions that we need to from there. We're using task because that was what we were using as our object in the other one. And we come through and we just call the register on. We just call register, which is part of the Mojolicous plugin. We get our app. We assign a helper, and we just, that's similar syntax to how we had it before. We just are now calling our helper and processing the task, passing in that subroutine of what we had before. And I did add one more thing here, just if this is successful, return 1. If not, it will return undefined. So now we can package this up and distribute this and use this same code throughout any other application that we would need to. And so now you can see them side by side of implementing it now into your application is just as simple as calling plugin and the name of your plugin. And if you have them installed either through CPAN minus or on your local machine, or if you have them in the directory structure, Mojolicous will go look for those. And we've replaced all of that, and you can just include that in every single thing, and it will work the same as it was working as if you were calling it as a helper. So why would you want to package those and distribute them that way? That gives you the ability to use that same package on multiple machines. Say you're distributing your information through, and you are using load balancing in different clusters of servers, and you're doing different things. Once you package that, and you can distribute that and deploy that through either an RPM base or through CPAN, and you can pull that information down and into your you can pull that down, and you have full access to be able to run those wherever you would need to. That's a great ability to you as a developer, because then you don't have to remember what those things are. It's kind of like knowing the delay begin. You just have that available. You don't have to think about what was under it. You don't have to think about the language. You just know that's available. You know what it does, and you know it's going to work. And that sometimes is a mind shift set, because it does sometimes seem like there's just a lot of magic. That's pretty simple in syntax. That's pretty simple in theory. And yet it's so powerful and gives you so much ability to do that. Okay, so now you found a bug in your plugin. What would happen if you had that code copied and pasted throughout everything that you had done? You'd have to go to every server and update those servers. You'd have to deploy the RPMs. You'd have to do everything that you'd need to do. If you've done it like this, now you can just deploy and update that package, and you're good to go everywhere, as opposed to trying to track down all of the places that you had that code. So that's again just a very simple example of going through and creating a plugin or a helper inside of Mojolicous and creating reusable code. Where do you go then to see those things? As Perl developers, we're very lucky to have CPAN. And not only for just Mojolicous plugins, but for anything that you can pretty much think of. It's pretty much been done before. Why reinvent the wheel? There's a great source out there for being able to go and find things that others have built. We all rely on modules that have been been around from the beginning, and then new ones that are coming around. Mojolicious is fairly new in the Perl community. The idea of non-blocking and some of that is all of a new concept. But now we can distribute that through CPAN, and we can package these modules, we can publish them, and it's as easy as anyone in this room can do it. You don't have to be the core developers of Perl. You don't have to be Larry Wall to go and release a module. These are contributed modules by people like us in this room. How many in here have contributed something to CPAN?
It's right there.
Yep. And you'll see that he's got plenty of them here. And
You know, it doesn't sparkle, but it does seg fault because you got to get out of it. That's actually what
Zombie apocalypse.
So you have, everyone in this room has been able to contribute back. That's one great thing about Perl, and that's one thing that I love personally about Perl is a lot of the other languages do have libraries, but again, they're generally maintained and made available by the developers or the creators of those languages. So the user submitted information in the open source nature of what we have available to share that knowledge comes back to the same thing of code reuse. When you're planning your project, you generally want to go through and identify what pieces can I use from other locations? What things can I use? Is using a framework like Mojolicous going to take a whole lot of load off of me going through and creating a framework off of just using CGI? There's been a lot of talk about CGI in the Perl community lately about just removing it. And so what tools can I have? What tools can I use? Also, for the same thing with regular expressions, just because you can doesn't always mean you should. You need the right tool for the job. And we're lucky with Perl that there's a lot of tools for the job in a lot of those cases. And my own personal plug too is I would recommend if you're not using Mojolicious, you should be in most cases. It's a wonderful framework that does a lot of that for you that you just don't have to think about. It just gives it to you and allows you to just do what you need to do, your job, your function, your program. So there's all kinds of things out there, especially when you're talking about frameworks. There's now Catalyst and Dancer, and from Bluehost, we use CGIX, which was written by Paul. There's a lot of different frameworks, and there's a lot of different ways to do what you need to do. So as you're planning that, look at what's already there. Look at what's already available. So you don't have to recreate that. You don't have to go through and do that. So that's what you want to make sure you get to. If everybody in here pretty much raised their hand when we were talking about publishing, so these last slides are just going to be a review. Once you have your idea, you can go to get a PAWS account and create your PAWS account, and this allows you to publish your modules and share them with other people. Now that also doesn't, where it's all open, you don't have to make them for anybody else but yourself. Sometimes you might want to deploy your packages or other things through CPAN. Have your code base there. Have it there for other people might come across it, might need to use it. When I started doing a lot of this, I started getting a lot of feedback, and people were using the modules because I was releasing them for myself. I was putting them up there so I had them so I could install easily on machines or different systems, and I got emails from people saying, hey, I was using this and it would be really cool if you added this feature. Well, I didn't expect anybody to use it, but that's a cool feature. I should probably add that in. Or if I don't like what somebody did, I can fork that and make that my own. So if you don't have a PAWS account, I highly recommend that you do that. It's very easy to sign up. You go to paws.perl.org, go through and register and request your PAWS account. And then once you have that, it takes a couple days generally, depending on who's monitoring the creation of the accounts. And then you get that. Once you have that, you can go through and you set up and you can make yourself publicly available. And you can configure to get a cpan.org email address and have all that come through to to you. And then you can use different applications. I choose usually to use Distzilla for anything that I'm publishing. Paul, who's not here right now, he had stepped out, but he writes all of his own. He doesn't do anything pre-made. He just creates his YAML files and does all that. That's a lot of work. So there's a lot of things to do that. I'm lazy. I'm a programmer. That's why I choose to use something like this. So Distzilla is easy. You can start scratch if you don't have a module already created. You just call Dzill new, and then whatever your module name is, it'll create your file structure. Then you can start on your account, write your code from there. If you already have an existing one, you can just come in and just call Dzill release on your module. It'll go through and package and give you your release control. There's a lot of cool plugins for all of these too that can do things like meta information to meta CPAN, and release information, release control, to pod documentation, all kinds of really cool things that you just kind of get out the gate from these tools. So Distzilla is one that is really great. Then once you get that done, then you can distribute your module. It's available for other people and or to yourself, and you now have gone through and created an application or a function that you can reuse. And by reusing that code in other locations, that saves you time, it saves you energy, it saves you effort. If you ever need to change that, it changes it in all those locations, and it'll keep you doing the tasks that you need to do. Instead of fighting with code, fighting with copying and pasting, it gives you more time to spend on actually doing the things that you need to in your job or your leisure, or getting to the core that we all like doing. We like to solve problems. We like to figure things out. We like to challenge ourselves. And it's not challenging to ourselves if we're just copying and pasting code and changing lines, other than it's challenging because we want to stab ourselves in the face or something. I encourage everybody to take a look at what they're doing in your own programming. Find places where you can abstract out different things. If you ever come across where you see the same code twice, that's definitely time to refactor and redistribute. You shouldn't have those types of things inside of your code base, because you will set yourself up for failure almost every time that you do that. So I would just like to, again, encourage everybody to take a step back sometimes when you're even under the gun, and make sure that you uphold to the practice of writing something that you're going to reuse. Don't go into writing your code thinking that you can just copy and paste that into something else. Package it, create modules, distribute that to others, get feedback, give feedback. That's what's great about it too, is you can go and alter that and submit things back. And with that, is there any questions? So one of the things I kind of just wanted to show that one of the ones that I've just kind of, as I've been learning and working with this, is I created just a simple to-do list using Mojolicous, and the application is running on just a simple server with very little resource, a 512 RAM, small network, but you can go and distribute and deploy something very powerful that a lot of people can use on the front end. And this is all just on my GitHub. I have a couple of different projects that I've done that are there. But to show how the directory structure is for a plugin, I'll pull this one up. Let me make that a little bit bigger. So you can see if you're inside of your application, you can just create a folder Mojolicious plugin and call the plugin. And then when you instantiate that inside of your application, it will know to look in that directory structure if it's not already installed. And all this one does is it's just passing a DBI connection to DBAX connector. And so it just registers the plugin and goes through kind of like what we showed. You can pass in the arguments of your configuration, and then it just sets up a new connection for you to be able to use. And this is supposed to make it a little bit more, this is supposed to be more non-blocking, but again, you'd still underlying be using DBI, and you'd be restricted by MySQL or whatever other part that you were using that was non-blocking. So then inside of this, the application looks like this. Starts out just a light Mojolicious application, and then we're just calling plugin and passing the different plugins. So here's just the plugin, and here's us just instantiating some information using config, reading in from a config to pass in the information.
So you don't get to pick the full path package name? I mean, it's Mojolicious plugin, :
and then yeah, that way. Yeah, I mean, you could create whatever module you'd want to, and then you just instantiate the module name that you created. It doesn't have to be in the Mojo namespace. If you were publishing it to CPAN or other, if you wanted it to load in this directory structure. If not, if you wanted it to be my app : my function, you could just reference it that way there in the namespace.
But then you can use the plugin word.
You can use the plugin word. You just need to change it to know the name of the plugin. Yeah. And so again, there's hundreds of plugins, especially for Mojolicious already, or any code that you're using. If you're using Catalyst or Dancer or even Distilla, there's a whole bunch of already built plugins and modules that you can use that will that you don't have to go and write. Oftentimes, the mindset and the mentality of a new programmer is they want to come in and write it themselves because then they'll understand it better. And as people start, I've seen the transition from people learning that this is what it takes when you start out. I want to rewrite the world. I want to do everything myself. I'm going to just do it this way because it's much easier than trying to figure out how somebody else did it. But as you start to move over time and you start to progress and move forward, you see that there's, CPAN's a wonderful example. Perl Monks, Stack Overflow. There's all kinds of resources out there that show you ways of doing it, so you don't have to create that. And that it's a great feeling to see that mind shift of people realizing that I don't have to do this, somebody else has already done it, and I can just get at the task at hand. So this is kind of just a mixture of plugins and helpers. So the plugins were at the top, and just a bunch of helpers. And then when you get down to the actual functions themselves, they're very small and simple. And testable, because so now, like we were talking about the insert, now the insert's really easy because I'm just going to get a list of parameters and use my insert, as opposed to having all of that code written inside of that subroutine. But now I might need to insert in multiple places, or I might need to create in multiple places, and it just makes it a lot easier and a lot cleaner. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily, like in that case, because I have the default one defined by whatever table. But then I have a couple of other applications that I've packaged those same helpers and made them and converted them into plugins so that I could use them in other applications. So, and then the last plug is if you are interested in Mojolicious, Glenn has done a great job with the Mojocasts. I highly recommend going and looking at those. They're very very helpful and give you a lot of great information about how to get started. It's really easy. Using Mojolicous is very easy to get started out with, and you have a lot of power right out the door, and you can use it blocking or non-blocking, and that's a great part of it too. It's very lightweight, very easy to install, and very easy to set up and configure. So,
Do you have any live demos for that?
Live demos were bad. They always were.
let's see.
It's pre-recorded, it's not live.
So one of the on GitHub, there's a whole bunch of people who have created different little simple Mojo applications to do a lot of different things. And so one of them that was on there was really old, which was just a blog software called, I think this one that I'm using is just Bootylicious, but then I took it and updated it and made some changes, and just I'm using it. So this is serving off of the same server, just running Hypnotoad, and as you can see, it'll pass the URL through into the application. And so last year when I was at YAPC, I just used this to take notes for all the different talks that I went to. So I wrote the application, updated it, changed it, made it how I wanted it, and then this is just using Mojolicous and that on the back end. And so I was also playing around with different ways of deploying it. You can still do it through CGI, you can do it through Hypnotoad, you can do it through a reverse proxy in Nginx or Apache if you needed to. I have found though that I've enjoyed using the Hypnotoad more than any of the others.
This is an example of is this Hypnotoad engine?
Yeah, this one is Hypnotoad.
There's no Apache or...
And I don't think I can get to the server from here. I'd log in and show the process in the startup. But so this is just a simple, and the code for this is here.
So Hypnotoad listens on the privileged port 80 and like
Well, I have a reverse proxy set up. So I have Hypnotoad running on a different port, and then Apache is just translating that port as if you go to port 80 on the different things. So I have an Apache configuration doing a reverse proxy to Hypnotoad on, I don't remember what that one is. Yeah. Yeah, so this is just the, this isn't the one that I haven't put the one that I've modified back, I haven't pushed it back, but this is the one that I forked it from. So just this simple application, it's 600 lines, and even includes the images embedded inside of the, so they've just, any of the images that are there are all embedded in that. So it's still only 600 lines, and I have a fully functioning blog software to be able to create and modify blog posts. Then it's just using a markdown file system. So to add a new blog post, you just upload a file with the markdown of how you want it to be formatted, and this reads it in and displays it there. So you can see, like on the main page, it's only reading part of it. You could click to read more, and part of that is I can try to look for one of the. Let's see what call this is making. So we want articles. So you can see here that these are the requests that are being made, that are being passed into there. So it's going to take these comments, and then that's the function for that particular request. And that just that and then one of the nice things too is then with the embedded Perl templating, that's the template again right there in there. And with the embedded Perl, you just have your template that renders from that. Now, as you get bigger and larger scale, you can break out all of these into their own separate files so that you don't have all of that in there. But the idea of a lot of these different applications on GitHub that you can go and find are to do it as simple and small and, you know, as
So if you want to look like PHP.
Yeah.
Code.
But the embedded Perl is a little bit nicer than doing it with PHP. And then this makes it nice if you're creating APIs and you wanted to return JSON as opposed to something else. You just drop that in and you can render it as JSON. A lot of great things that you can do just really simply without having to think about it. So, any questions? Okay, so that does it for me.